I'm sorry. So this is the last presentation of the Mikrotik Users Conference. I hope I won't be boring you till the last minute. I would definitely like to see interaction if possible, so you can ask questions or you can approach me later after the presentation. What I will be discussing here today with you is our experience in using Mikrotik routers, especially low-end routers, as devices that enable so-called Soho, that are enabling so-called Soho environments. So the Soho meaning small office, home office environment, which is very popular these days. My name is Arijan Siska, and I come from a company called Siopti, SIOPTI. There's an email address for anyone who might be interested. Basically, this presentation is about the experience we've had over a number of years installing these devices and what we've learned, what happens in real environment with real people involved. Okay? So, as we mentioned earlier, what is a Soho? Soho means small office, home office environment. It's very important because there is a lot of interest for it. On the other hand, it is very challenging because the Soho market introduces a lot of requirements for the equipment that the equipment needs to support, starting from VPN, security, reliability, remote access, logging, and so forth and so forth. And last but not least, it needs to carry a reasonable cost, right? If it's too expensive, then the companies just aren't interested. They are interested in using these markets to ultimately drive down the cost of their, how shall I say, office environments, right? Sorry, this clicker doesn't work. Oh, so the company that I come from has a lot of experience in routing and switching. We've done quite a number of installations, especially for bigger companies, some ISPs and so forth, mostly routing and switching. And as a partnering with these service providers, we've done quite a number of installations. We've encountered this market some years ago where the service provider would be offering these so-called managed services for their customers. So the installation would be done in a very small office, in a remote office, or even a home office. We have started working, as I mentioned earlier, with a number of big vendors, but ultimately what we came to realize is that Mikrotik offers a tremendous added value in this, especially in this environment. So this has become quite a focus for us. So it's not just that it's price point, but also the functionality and reliability it offers and the ease of use, right? So why are our customers interested in installing this? Well, most likely, most importantly, to drive down the cost. Employees are arguably the single most expensive cost item in the company's balance sheet. And keeping the customers satisfied and also trying to leverage them as much as possible to do useful work for a company is obviously a priority. So instead of having one big office, a company may decide to have several smaller offices which are closer to where people live, or even a home office, depending on the nature of the business that the company is involved with, of course. But this is definitely a trend that we are seeing, not just in this country, but also throughout the region. Okay? But the key word here is efficiency, cost effectiveness, right? We need to do this at a certain cost, otherwise it doesn't make any sense, right? So the big enterprises have been doing this for decades. But not the small companies, because for the small companies, the entry point into installing this was usually, or used to be, very high, right? And why is that? I mean, if we just give a couple of points here, it's because of high cost of communication lines. Not so long ago, internet services weren't readily available, high-speed internet services weren't readily available everywhere. So the company that wanted to install a home office for someone had to spend a lot of money just to buy a communication line, not to mention the complexity and the cost of for the installation of the equipment itself. Here is a simple breakdown which I've done off the top of my head, so you don't need to take it literally, but it definitely shows you what the cost structure for this used to be and why it wasn't interesting for smaller companies to embark on this. But as I mentioned earlier on a previous slide, most of these obstacles are now gone. So this is being massively deployed in all sorts of industries. Okay? So for the SMB market, this used to be a no-go because small companies didn't have access to IT, huge IT departments didn't get big discounts on the with vendors and so forth. And in reality, this really started as a, the companies that really started this started with installations which did follow the cost structure, which did fall into a certain cost bracket so that it was suitable for them to do so, but this was usually done with some very strange equipment. I mentioned here Tomato, which by the way I used to use as well, but definitely this is not something I would recommend for an average company, simply because of the tinkering involved, and playing with it is perhaps not idea of fun for everyone, right? Okay, so initially this was a no-go either, until Mikrotik came ago, which we've started working with, I believe, in 2008, 2007, 2008, initially experimentally, and then it basically grew. And Mikrotik offered a solution for this problem, and a number of things that I list here are all relevant, but I would just like to highlight one of them, and this is the functionality. And this was really a key sell for us, because all of a sudden we were able to place a piece of equipment somewhere which didn't cost thousands of euros, and it offered all the functionality that we would probably ever need in such an environment. From routing to security to bridging to all sorts of things that we will see later on in real examples. And also the performance was not that bad either. I mean, we've done some installations for companies that really required inter-site triple DES encrypted traffic, and the RB800 was very popular in that area. We didn't use it with any wireless cards or anything. It was just a router, and it could do easily 50 megabits of triple DES encrypted VPN traffic, and it was excellent. I mean, this was the price point of RB800 was something like 10 times less than a comparable price point of a established vendor, and it was just a huge market initially for it. Okay, but of course, for some installations where high performance triple DES encrypted VPN traffic is not a requirement, the entry router 750 was quite enough, and it was used also quite extensively. I believe the final number of installations we've done with 750 exceeds 300 installations easily. So it was also very popular. Also very cost effective, by the way. Okay, so the pictures I'm showing you, by the way, on these slides are the real life examples of what's actually installed, and it's actually performing what it needs to do, right? So this is not a marketing slide that someone would set up in a photo studio. This is a real life example of an RB750, and I believe, GS250 switch. Yeah, so it's a router and a switch. Which, by the way, if I can just make a quick comment to Mikrotik people. You guys should really think about starting to develop, some bigger switches for us, because we would really love to have that option available. Because nowadays, usually when we have such a home office environment, we can put in one or two switches, 5 ports each. If one is used for interconnection, then you have 4 available for end devices, and that way we can support up to 8, 12 endpoint devices. But usually, we would be much more comfortable if we had a lot more room to maneuver with. Also, installations with more than one switch and are connected to a router are usually not that, how shall I say, elegant, right? What we were surprised with in this regard was that, judging from the huge number of installations we've done, we were able to draw some conclusions, some statistics. And the hardware lifetime easily exceeds 4 years. Initially, there was a problem with one particular version of RB750, which had a capacitor which would blow up after 2.5 years approximately. But I believe that problem's been solved now, because now it's a solid capacitor. And the only outages that we could identify, the reason for outages that we could identify usually boil down to either power outages or software bugs. So there will be a memory leak in a particular release of the software, which would cause a router to periodically reboot. But this uptime easily exceeds 1 year, right? Especially, we were quite fortunate with the 330 release of Mikrotik software, which was very, very stable. I believe it never crashes. I believe it's the best software Mikrotik's ever written, because it just never crashes. Sure, it lacks some functionality, judging from today's perspective, but if you can get away with it, I would recommend doing it, because it's very, very, very stable. And it also has a small memory footprint, okay? So the home office environment, as I mentioned earlier, can usually be just one router, one switch, maybe 2 switches, and so forth. For a smaller office where you typically have up to 10 people, this is a little bit more challenging, because you do not have just end user devices, computers, for example, but you also have printers, you also have some servers, and the number of devices in a small office environment usually exceeds, I would say, 20. And this is the reason why I was calling on our Mikrotik colleagues here to think about developing a switch with a bit more ports. Performance-wise, usually the Mikrotik product line is more than enough. I don't think you need to go for really big routers here, because the internet access line, even for small offices nowadays, rarely exceeds 10 megabits per second. And usually the requirement is to have a symmetric line, so you have both 10 megabits of downstream and 10 megabits of upstream. So the usual Mikrotik product line is more than enough. We also had quite a number of questions and quite a number of requests from our customers to support so-called mobile users or road warriors, right? These are the people that would run around with their laptops or whatever gadgets they have, and they would want to have all the services available on those devices that they have in the office. And for this reason, they need to have some sort of VPN technology on those devices that would allow them to connect to the main office. Now, the traditional approach of big vendors with this regard was to develop a piece of software, VPN software, that you would typically have to install on your own device. And then hopefully it would work and not mess up your network stack on your PC, and some of you probably realize which vendor I'm referring to here. But also the question always is this software available for your particular device? Is it available for the iPad? Is it available for Mac? Is it available for Linux? And most often we had to settle for, excuse me, was there a question? No? Most often we were forced to settle for good old PPTP, which is a very simple VPN service. I believe it's not so terribly secure, but for most users it's probably good enough. And the best part is it's available on almost all devices, except of course Microsoft Windows Phone, which some of you may use. But anyway, allowing for this VPN termination service to be enabled on a router, even on a small RB750, is really not a big challenge, and we were able to provide for that as well. So we didn't need an additional piece of equipment to be installed just to provide for the VPN service. And the customers really appreciate this because it doesn't take much more space, it's not expensive. Also, the service provider who offered this as a managed service love this, because why? Because all the services can be enabled based on a request from a customer on the same device, which they've already installed, right? For them, the biggest single cost of service is sending someone to the site to install something. And if anything can be deployed remotely via configuration, it's perfect. So this has been another, let's say, big story. And also, I wanted to mention something which you probably also encountered in real life, and this is a question of allowing for special kind of projects which don't follow necessarily any kind of prescribed recipe. We've had actually 2 or 3 projects like this, which were all the same. A company was getting a service from internet service from a service provider. It was a managed service. They suddenly decided they wanted to migrate an office to another location, but due to resource constraints and other constraints, this had to be a soft migration, which means that at some point in time, some people would be still residing at the old location and some would be moved to a new location. And due to various issues with configuring endpoint devices, especially Microsoft Windows PCs, which have firewall enabled by default and therefore do not allow for traffic to terminate on a device which resides in a different subnet, had to do it preferably transparently so that it would seem as if both sites were connected to the same local area network. Of course, availability of direct fiber optic connection between the sites was usually not an option, especially because of the price. So we had to improvise, and for this, we used the Ethernet over IP tunneling protocol, which all Mikrotik routers provide. And it was a huge success because the migration was really a soft one. It went without any issues. And if the internet service was good enough, up to, let's say, 100 megabits per second internet service was sometimes available, then this would be almost transparent to the end user. They wouldn't even notice that all of a sudden the server they are connecting to is no longer residing physically in the same building. It's on another site. The reason I mentioned this is because this type of functionality is by default enabled in all Mikrotik routers. We don't think much of it. We may not see a big use for it in real day-to-day life. But when the situation occurs and you have to do something to solve the customer problem in the most painless way possible, these things are ideal, right? And this is something that you come to really appreciate when you work with Mikrotik for a long time, because you can always count that there will be something to help you. Also, just on a side note, if the encryption is not a requirement in such a project, even a good old RB750 or some low-end router like that can deliver a lot of performance in terms of Ethernet over IP. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to buy huge routers to provide for this service. Lastly, I wanted to mention something which probably is almost never advertised when people are renting office space or renting internet services, but which we've come to appreciate very much. And this is especially true when basically you are offering services, managed services to customers, and you don't have time to go over there every day to fix something, right? And working with Mikrotik, we really came to appreciate the reliability of hardware and software. Also, what we really came to differentiate is that some service providers may have a lot better service than the others in terms of the reliability of a service. Sometimes we have customers which really do require 24/7 internet access, and they don't tolerate outages very much. And in such instances, knowing what service providers are capable of, I mean, what their track record is really crucial. And this is usually not advertised, right? When we go and buy an internet access service, what we want to know is how many euros I have to pay for how many megabits per second of internet traffic. But rarely do we get quoted a figure on how many outages does this service provider have in a given year. And this also probably is something that varies from location to location. So in some locations, the service provider may have a better service than the others. And this is something, for example, I would appreciate very much if the landlords who rent office spaces would consider advertising, because for me personally, for my company, renting an office space with a lousy internet service is simply impossible, right? Because that would be a big impact on the business that we do. So having a nice office means nothing if the internet doesn't work there reliably. You know, it doesn't have to be fast, it just needs to be very reliable. And this reliability factor, I believe, is also something that our customers start to appreciate more and more. Also, I wanted to mention something regarding wireless systems. Initially, all of our customers wanted to have wireless Wi-Fi as part of the solution offered to them. And with this in mind, we've encountered some real world issues, some real world problems. Namely, because of the size of the project, bear in mind that we're talking here about a small company with 5 employees with no IT to speak of, with no server infrastructure to speak of. The typical installation of Wi-Fi in such an environment would be to simply put in a Wi-Fi enabled router with some pre-shared key configuration to encrypt the traffic, and there you go, right? But over the years, this pre-shared key would get disseminated not just to the company's customers, the company that uses this, their customers, but also their neighbors and so forth, and would simply become a huge security risk, right? And they didn't have the knowledge or expertise or the realization that they need to change the key, encryption key, every now and then. They would be running the same encryption key for 7-8 years before the problems arose. Also, it was very quickly discovered that the customers never really realized that what they should be really thinking about is installing a public service which they could offer to their partners or clients or give out to neighbors or whatever. And if they really require Wi-Fi service for the employees, then this should be a separate SSID, a separate wireless service, that they wouldn't hand out keys to anyone, so that they would try to maintain a certain level of security, because the wireless is not just about the access, it's also about access to the internet, it's also about access to servers, to other PCs. So as a security risk in small companies, Wi-Fi is probably the biggest single one, and we always try to eliminate it as much as possible. So either install it as a separate service or a separate routed network or whatever. So to finish up, not to keep you any longer unnecessarily, a lot of small companies and also a lot of companies that do systems integrations are looking into this market. Our experience has been that this is a very valuable market, potentially a very big market, because everybody wants to leverage the technology and use it as much as possible. But you need to start slow and go slow, because there is nothing worse than a big bang installations where you install hundreds of routers throughout the field only to realize that they may be a wrong model or have a wrong software or a wrong configuration or whatever. And then you need to go back and replace some of the equipment and so forth. Believe me, I've had such an experience in the past. Well, maybe not hundreds, but definitely tens of routers. And it was never pretty. It was always a pain. So try to build experience and test things. Possibly talk to someone who's already walked this path and may have an insight on what's ahead of you. So with that in mind, I would like to close down my presentation. Thank you very much for being patient with me. And I would like to open the floor for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Do we have any questions? Okay. Thank you. Don't go